But tonight I wanted to talk about what Good Friday is and what's this all about. And so tonight I wanted to do the walk part 4. And I wanted to cover what actually happened once Jesus got to the cross. And I'm going to read you this, and then I'm going to share a bit of my story. And then I'm believing tonight someone's going to be inspired by what God can do in their lives. But in Luke 23, we're just going to pick it up. You can read along with me. We can follow this together. It says here, the people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. This is Jesus they're talking about. And they said, hey, if you have saved others, then why don't you save yourself? He is, after all, God's Messiah, right? The chosen one. And so just for some context for Good Friday, and just so to get everyone up to speed, Jesus found himself as an innocent man being betrayed by one of the 12 disciples. He gets taken to a trial, and then they say, look, it's too bad, too sad, you're going to be hung on the cross. And Jesus never replies, he never argues, he never says, I don't deserve this. He quietly carries his cross. And then they start to mock him, and they start to say, come on, if you saved others, then save yourself. And so the soldiers who came, they started to mock him, and they offered him wine vinegar. And they said, if you are the king of the Jews, then save yourself. Now I just want to pause there for a second, because we're about to find out what this story is about. These guys that were around Jesus were so focused on Jesus saving himself that they missed that Jesus was actually trying to save us. And so they're mocking him again. They say, King of the Jews, save yourself, save yourselves. And they even wrote a notice above his head on the cross, and it said, King of the Jews. Now, what had happened was Jesus is on the cross, and there's 2 other crosses there, and there's 2 other people there. And it says here in 39, one of the criminals who hung there, someone else that had to carry their cross and be hung up, insulted Jesus. He said, aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But there was another criminal on the cross, and he said simply this. He rebuked him. He said, hey, hang on. Don't you fear God? Don't you know who you're talking to? See, unlike us, we deserve our punishment. He does not deserve it. And it said here, he looks at Jesus, and the other criminal says, hey, Jesus, remember me. I want you to listen to this part here. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied to him, one of the greatest sentences, I think, in the Bible. He says, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. And so we have this Good Friday, we have this tragedy story, we have this bad scenario where an innocent man's hung on a cross for who knows what. They all just accused him and lied about him and mocked him, and they put him on there. But there's 2 other guys standing with him. One's like, hey, if you really are God, get me down from here. If you really are God, save us. And the other one's like, hey, I don't know about you, but I deserve what the wrongs I've done. I deserve the punishment I'm getting. Just remember me, God, when I die. And so what I've realized in this message and this kind of understanding of the walk is that everyone has a walk. Everyone has a journey. Everyone has a story. Everyone has something that's part of their lives that, whether we chose it or we didn't choose it, or we had a good upbringing or a bad upbringing, whatever it is. And I find it fascinating that even though Jesus is at the end of his walk, there's also 2 criminals on the cross at the end of their walk. It shows me that the walk is part of all of us. And so tonight I thought I would share just a little bit of my story of how I came to find God and how I gave my life to be a pastor full time. When I was young, I actually grew up in a church home. My parents ran a church, and I was around the church a lot, and I was around all the stage and the building and all this sort of stuff. And I knew there might have been something out there. Like, I was kind of like, well, there's a lot of people that believe in this, there's a lot of people that do this, and there's a lot of people that, hang around the church and raise their hands and all this stuff we do. So maybe there's something out there. Maybe there is a God. And I remember growing up thinking that, I know something's out there, but, how about I just look for it later? How about I go find it later? And, growing up in a Christian home, I also realized I saw miracles. I saw things happen that didn't make sense. I saw all this stuff in the church. I saw stuff that, you would think that if you saw it, you'd believe God's real. But at the end of the day, I grew up not being sure. I knew of God, and I knew how it worked, and I knew there was a Bible, and I knew people followed God, but I didn't know if he was real, and I could feel him and know that he's really there. And so as I hit high school and as I started to get older, I started to make my own decisions and live a life that was far from God, live a life that was my own way, doing whatever I want, and finding myself in quite a bit of trouble. And it's a crazy story because I finished high school and I'm like, cool, I'm just going to do my thing, live my life, and I'll just figure this out as I go. And back then we didn't have Tinder. We actually had Facebook Marketplace for finding your girlfriend. And I met my current wife now on Facebook. It was like this Facebook thing, and so we met and we ended up hanging out, and we went to like nightclubs together, and we hung out and all this stuff, and I kind of like just lived my life at this stage, and we made friends and lovers over Facebook. And I remember when we had found each other, there was a lot of mess. There was a lot of things we had to work through. There was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of heartache. There was a lot of bad decisions that Kirsty and I had made. And it came to a place where this was super tough. Now, I just want to back the story up a little bit. I knew of religion. I knew that there was this thing they call God and church and all that sort of stuff. But I was so empty and so feeling so worthless that I thought that wasn't my answer. And I remember one day Kirsty got home from the pub and she said to me, she goes, "Hey, Sam, I was just talking to some people at the pub and they said your dad's a priest." And I remember just like denying it straight up. I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who they said." She goes, "Is he? You're like the eldest of 6 kids, right? Your dad's breaking the law by having so many kids because he's like a priest." And I remember like just going, "Man, I got to deny who I am. I got to deny where I'm from." I even said, I think she remembers. I said, "Who told you that? I'm gonna get him." But I was denying who I was, and I was denying where I was from, and I was denying who I was because I was trying to figure out my own hurts. There was a point in our lives where we were just doing our thing, and we had some trauma, we'd had some stuff we had to work through and some stuff we had to do. And I remember for a moment thinking that it would be easier to take my own life than to live. It'd be easier for me just to end it all. It'd be easier for me just to stop living than to continue on with this journey. And I don't know how Kirsty felt at the time, but she also hit a crossroads herself and she started searching. And all of a sudden, from hearing that, maybe my dad's a priest and my family go to this church, she started asking questions. She said, "I want to know what they're all about. I want to know what's going on." I'm trying to convince her otherwise. I'm like, "Trust me, you don't want to church and religion, and you don't want to do that." But Kirsty was curious, and Kirsty was looking for something, and it's a crazy story because Kirsty ended up pursuing God, and her life started to change right in front of me. I used to say to myself when I was younger, "Hey, I want to live my life, I want to do what I want to party, I want to do whatever I can, and then when I'm older, like 40 plus, I will go and find God so I don't end up in hell." I had this perception that I just get it all right before I die. But Kirsty was looking for something in the now. And so she started to change. Now, I'll say this as nice as I can. Kirsty's pretty, not stuck in her ways. What's the right word? Black and white. Everyone's saying be careful at the front here. Kirsty don't muck around. She is yes or no. She will tell you how it is. She will be honest about it, and there's no filter. And so I fell in love with this. And when that personality started to change, when she started to reflect that maybe there was a God that wasn't out of religion, but out of a real relationship, I saw something changing within her. And so within that, I started to change. I started to go, maybe there is more to this. And maybe there's more to this God thing that I used to know, and I'm trying to run away from it, and Kirsty's here pursuing it. And then I think about the 2 guys on the cross. One is like, "Hey, Jesus, religion, God, church. If you were so awesome, I wouldn't have problems. If you were so awesome, I wouldn't have these hardships. If you were so awesome, if you were a good God, you would fix my life up. You would make things good, and there wouldn't be sickness and all these bad things in the world. And if you were so awesome, you would save us." But one of the criminals said, "Nah, I know life's a bit messed up. I know I've made mistakes. I know that I've missed the mark. I know that's not perfect. And so remember me when I take my last breath. And I started to realize in my own life I had to choose which cross I was. Now come on, I want to preach to someone tonight. I had to choose what cross I was. Now I might be speaking to someone that believes in God, and I want to speak to people that don't believe in God, but there was a cross that I had to choose where I had to blame the world, blame people around me, blame what's going on in my life, and I would deflect who I was, or I had to start to reflect in who I was. I had to come to a point in my life where I realized it wasn't what I could do for God, but it was understanding what He was here to do for me. I stopped self-deflecting. I had to self-reflect, because here's the crusher of the story. The difference between Kirsty and I is that Kirsty knew she was broken, and I thought I wasn't. Kirsty knew she had to change something, and I thought I don't have to change a damn thing. Kirsty knew that she had to do something with life, and I thought, well, I'm part of the good upbringing, so I'm flawless. I'm okay, I'm all good. So when the bad came and the things went wrong and all this stuff happened, I would blame people, I'd blame my circumstances, I'd blame the world. But the more Kirsty accepted that she was far from God, she was broken, she was lost, the more her life began to transform before my very eyes. And so I stopped blaming other people and stopped blaming that life was unfair. And I stopped pointing the finger, and I simply just had to accept that I'm broken and that I'm human. There's something freeing about that. I don't know if anyone here tonight, I don't know if you've got a church background or you don't, or you think you've had to stretch your whole life to be accepted by God, but just to take a moment to self-reflect and realize we all need God. Not because God makes things perfect, but because in our imperfection, we need a God, we need a Savior, we need Him more than ever. And so we don't self-deflect, we self-reflect. And my life started to make sense. Things started to make sense, and all of a sudden I felt that there was a reason why I existed. I felt that I wasn't just here for no reason. And I'm believing tonight, there's some people in here and you don't know your reason. I'm believing that when you self-reflect, you'll realize what the cross meant. You'll realize what God was doing. And I was finding peace, I was finding purpose, and I was finding all these things that didn't make sense when I started to look within instead of looking around and out. See, tonight, someone here, life's been life and things have gone wrong, and sometimes we blame God for that. God didn't show up. Some people I know don't believe in God because if God was real, then why would bad things happen? There's a list of reasons why we know that people don't believe in God, or people are far from God, or people don't want to give God a second. And I want to read you this last bit, and I want to just tail it in, of why I believe the world's far from God. And so in Luke 23, it says here, Jesus, and this is the end of the walk, Jesus calls out in a loud voice, Father. Now I want you to listen to this part here, and it's powerful, and it will change your heart if you listen to what's going on. Jesus called out in a loud voice, he says, Father. I love this. It's not like God, or it's not like magical man in the sky. It's not like, oh, religion. He's like, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he took his last breath. And so why did Jesus do what Jesus did? And the reality is because you and I, and everyone in this room, and everyone watching online, you are loved beyond belief. Father, you know, you're more than him than what you think. You're more than just needing a religion to follow. You're more to him than needing to clean your conscience. You're more than him than just feeling less guilty. I don't know what's happened with religion or the church, but people think it's a place to clear our conscience or to tick the box so we don't go to hell. But God's like, I never intended that. I never wanted that. He's like, listen to what my son said. He yells out, Father. You are far more than a religion to him. You are far more than a group of people to him. You are far more than if you came to Good Friday service to him. You are far more. And when I got older and I started to realize I was far more than just going to church. I was far more than just going to a Christian household. I was far more than doing this. And I took a moment to go, wow, it's not about whether I'm good or bad, whether I've got it together or not. It's just me going, holy dolly, I need a God. I'm not complete without him. I'm not finished without knowing him. And so I want to leave you this last point. I've had the privilege over the years to now have my own kids with the same, I have to clarify that, the same lady that I met on Facebook Marketplace. So we've had few hundred, she wishes. We've had 3. And as they grow older and as I realize that I've got to look after these kids, I started to realize, and I want to just speak to someone's heart tonight and I'm just going to close it up now, that I'm their biological father. I'm their dad. Like, if you've seen some of them, you can tell from a mile away, yep, look at the big head, that's his dad. And some of them I'm not sure about. I'm like, Blaze, you're so your mother. But the reality is, whether Dallas believes I'm his dad or not, the reality is whether he sins or not, the reality is whether he goes to church or not, the reality is whether he's mixed up or he's tormented or he's got mental issues or whatever it is, no matter what, he is my biological son. Nothing he does, nothing they do, my kids can separate the fact that I'm their dad and they're my children. No belief system, no world order, no atheism, no, thinking, I'm mixed up with my sexual preference. Whatever it is, I am their biological father. And the reality is that all of us, no matter what we've done, no matter what we do, no matter what we believe, we can't separate the fact that he's our father. For some people you thought you had to do certain things to be accepted by God. You had to be perfect and holy and go to church to become one of his kids. But the reality is you are his kids. And so Jesus did what Jesus did for one reason. And that was so you could reconnect with the Father. As the band comes. What we celebrate today as Good Friday, the walk. It was never about right or wrong. It was never about perfect and imperfect. It was never about good or bad. It was never about believers or non-believers. It was never about that. Good Friday represents a dad pursuing his kids at all cost, pursuing his kids so that you and I might have a chance to reconnect with the Father. It was never about religion. It was never about practicing. It was never about trying to figure this out. It was always realizing, instead of self-deflecting, it's about self-reflecting and going, God, I need you more than ever. And so some people out here today, you might have not realized that you're a daughter or a son of a God, whether you believe in him or not. There's a Father wanting to reconnect with you. That's why we call it Good Friday. Sad story. crucifixion. Jesus took his last breath. And then we label it with Good Friday. Because we knew we were far more than just a religion, far more than just a couple of people, far more than just going to church. We realized that he would do anything and everything so that you and I could have a chance to connect with the Father. And so that's why I'm a pastor. And that's why I gave my life to God. Not one person in my family convinced me God was real. My priest dad didn't convince me. Even Kirsty's transformation didn't convince me. Even all these things that happened didn't convince me. Even hearing Bible stories and knowing none of that convinced me. What happened was I had a moment with God that was so real. Nothing can prove it wrong now. Nothing can change my mind now. Nothing can change how I feel about what happened. I'm not a pastor because of religion. I'm a pastor because I felt God for real. And now I want to spend my life helping people find God for real. The atheist, I want to help people that are far from Him. I want to find people that don't believe He exists. I want to find all people and say, the Father wants to get to know you. It's not conforming to religion. It's feeling Him for real. So close your eyes with me tonight. God, across this place, the many beautiful sons and daughters that are here tonight, the ones you love, the ones that you sent your only Son for, that nothing can separate them from you being their dad. So the Father doesn't want you to jump through obstacles to meet Him. He's waiting right now to meet you. He's waiting right now to reconnect with you. He's waiting right now to say, you know what? You are loved. And so God, just like my story, I believe there's many stories in this room where in this next song, people are going to feel your presence. And they're going to, not what's happening on the outside, but within the inside, they're going to feel you for real. An undeniable feeling that no one can convince me is wrong, no one can convince me is not true. Something that changed me from the inside out. And I'm believing for that tonight here at Heart House. It's Good Friday. And some good moments are about to happen in this room.